Welcome to Life Stories, where ordinary lives reveal extraordinary truths. What would you do if the child you raised for 7 years looked at you one morning and no longer saw you as family? She gave up everything, her home, her independence, her peace, to raise the grandson she adored. But when her usefulness ran out, so did their love. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when silence replaces gratitude, when loyalty is mistaken for weakness, and when a mother decides she won't be invisible anymore. Stay with us, because what happens next isn't revenge. It's something far more powerful. Let's begin. The smell of garlic and thyme still clung to her apron as Evelyn Hartley stood motionless in the doorway, her hand frozen on the back of the chair. The kitchen behind her, once warm and humming with laughter, now felt like a stage after the final act. Crumb-covered plates on the table, chairs askew, and silence pressing down like a velvet curtain. Across from her, her daughter-in-law, Brooke, barely glanced up from her glass of lemon water. "We've been talking?" Brooke said evenly, her voice as crisp as the linen napkins she folded each morning, "and we think it's time we had our own space." Evelyn blinked. The words were simple, almost gentle, like a lullaby. But beneath them was the unmistakable edge of finality, cold, practiced, and deliberate. "Of course," Evelyn managed, her voice steadier than her heart. She didn't ask who "we" was. She didn't look at Matt, her only son, seated at the other end of the table, chewing as if he hadn't heard a thing. No thank you, no hug, no ceremony. Just like that, she was out. That night, she packed her few belongings into a rolling suitcase and left the apartment she had once helped them buy. She had sold her own home in Vermont to move in with them after Tyler was born. At the time, it hadn't even felt like a sacrifice. Just what mothers did. What grandmothers did. She remembered the late nights with fevers, the kindergarten drop-offs, the whispered bedtime stories about the moon and bravery. 7 years of her life poured into this family like honey into tea, sweet, quiet, and disappearing fast. And now she was clutter, background noise, a ghost taking up space. Evelyn moved back to Vermont, to the farmhouse her sister Nancy had kept all these years. The paint was peeling, the floors creaked, but the walls didn't whisper disdain. The trees outside didn't criticize her cooking. It was peace, brief, uncertain, but real. It lasted exactly 19 days. The call came one humid afternoon, the kind that stuck to your skin. "Hey, Mom," Matt said, too casually. "Tyler misses you. Any chance you could come help over the summer?" Evelyn said nothing. "Oh, and," he added, clearing his throat, "would you be able to help out with camp fees? It's a robotics thing, just $5,000. $5,000. She stared out the kitchen window. A bee bumped against the screen, over and over again, looking for a way back in. "They think I sold my home for them," she said later that night to Nancy, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. "They actually think I did that. For them." Nancy, ever the calm one, took her hand across the table and said simply, "Then maybe it's time they learn who you are now." That night, Evelyn lay awake in the twin bed with the stiff quilt. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks like roads she could have taken in another life, one where she hadn't given everything for people who treated her like an obligation. But anger, she knew, was a dangerous fire. It burned the wrong people if you let it rage. So she didn't rage. She planned. A week later, Evelyn arrived at their apartment in the city. She had told them yes, she would help, but she would stay at a nearby motel. Her back, she said sweetly, didn't do well on couches. The air mattress last time had given her migraines. They blinked, calculated, offered to split a rental. She declined, and then she pulled out a document, her version of a summer agreement. Childcare hours, days off, no laundry, no cooking unless she offered. Reimbursements for transport, Tyler only. Brooke's polite smile tightened like a too small belt. "Is this necessary?" Evelyn smiled back. "It's clarity." And for the first time in her life, Evelyn watched her son and daughter-in-law sign a contract with her, not as a mother, not as a guest, but as a professional. The days that followed were strange. Tyler was thrilled, of course. They visited the park, built Lego towers, made up games with sidewalk chalk. but the house was a minefield of silence and sharp glances. Brooke never said it, but Evelyn saw it in the twitch of her jaw. She hated this version of Evelyn, the one who didn't fold quietly back into servitude. And then came the twist Evelyn never saw coming. One evening, she returned early from the park with Tyler. His hand was sticky with ice cream. His smile was lopsided from losing a tooth. She opened the front door and froze. Brooke stood at the kitchen counter. A man leaned beside her. Tall, dark suit, expensive watch. Brooke didn't hear them come in. She was too busy whispering. "I'm telling you," she said, low and urgent. "She has the money. She sold the Vermont place, probably sitting on 6 figures. Matt doesn't know, but I've seen the account alerts. We get through the summer, play nice, and then we talk about trust access. Maybe through Tyler." Evelyn felt the world tilt under her feet. She stepped forward. Brooke turned. Their eyes met. The kitchen went still. "Oh," Brooke said, face pale but composed. "You're back early." Evelyn didn't speak. She looked at the man. The name tag on his suit read, James Whitman, estate planning advisor. Tyler looked from one adult to another, sensing something wrong, but not knowing what. "Grandma?" he asked softly, tugging at her sleeve. "Are you okay?" Evelyn knelt beside him, heart breaking and hardening all at once. "I'm just fine, sweetheart," she said. "But I think I've remembered something very important." She stood up, her voice calm, her eyes like flint. "Brooke, would you mind telling Matt I'll be at the motel tonight? I have some papers of my own to review." Brooke said nothing, but Evelyn saw it, the fear finally flicker. She turned to Tyler, kissed his forehead gently, and left. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She booked a call with a lawyer, because this time it wasn't about being needed. It was about being respected. And she wasn't leaving empty-handed. What would you do if someone used love as a transaction? Have you ever had to choose dignity over family? Next, Evelyn returns, this time not for summer care, but for a reckoning. Evelyn stared at the motel ceiling, the water stain above her bed resembling a country she couldn't name. Her phone rested on the nightstand, glowing dimly with a missed call from Matt. She didn't listen to the voicemail. She didn't need to. She knew the tone by heart now, apology coded in justification, concern with a hook. The sound of Tyler's voice from earlier still echoed in her ears. "Grandma, are you okay?" She had smiled when she said she was, but something in her had splintered. At 6:42 a.m., Evelyn pulled on her cardigan, zipped up her small bag, and walked down to the lobby. The morning air was thick with the promise of summer rain. She wasn't going back to the apartment that day. Not yet. Instead, she took a cab across the city to the one place she thought she'd never return to, her old condo. It stood there, smaller than she remembered, tucked between a bakery that had changed hands twice and a flower shop that somehow always smelled like weddings. It was still empty. Had been ever since she moved out to help raise Tyler. A for sale sign leaned awkwardly against the building's entrance. The letters faded from sun. She stood there for a long time, letting the city blur around her, until her fingers moved of their own accord and dialed Nancy. "You were right," she said quietly. "It's not about needing help. It's about control. Brooke's been watching my finances. She's planning something, with Tyler as the excuse." Nancy didn't answer right away. Then came her voice, firm and low. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn looked up at the condo's windows. They stared back at her like eyes that remembered too much. I think it's time to stop waiting for them to do the right thing. That afternoon, Evelyn requested a temporary hold on the condo's sale. The market was hot. She could afford to wait a little longer. But the decision wasn't just about real estate. It was about leverage, visibility, power. She didn't tell Matt. That night, she returned to the apartment like nothing had happened. Brooke was there, folding Tyler's clothes on the couch, her movements robotic. Matt sat at the table, reading something on his tablet, eyes darting up as she entered. "Hey, Mom," he said carefully, as if testing the temperature of her mood. "Evening," she said. She bent down and kissed Tyler's head. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Good," he beamed. "We built a robot out of cereal boxes. His name's Marvin, and he eats socks." Evelyn smiled. She didn't say a word about what she'd heard yesterday. Not yet. But at dinner, as Brooke passed her the salad bowl, Evelyn asked lightly, "Out of curiosity, have either of you looked into power of attorney laws recently?" The fork paused halfway to Brooke's mouth. Matt blinked. "What?" "Just wondering," Evelyn said. "You know, in case something happened to me, since you've been talking to that estate advisor." Brooke dropped her fork. "Matt, can I speak to you in the kitchen?" Evelyn listened to the murmurs, the rising heat behind the closed door. Tyler kept eating, oblivious, but her fingers trembled slightly under the table, not from fear, from clarity. Later that night, Matt came into the living room, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when he'd been caught lying as a boy. "Mom," he said, "we were just trying to understand things better. If anything ever happened to you, we weren't trying to take over." Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Matt, I gave up everything so you could build your life, and now you and Brooke are strategizing behind closed doors about what's left of mine." He said nothing. She continued, "I'm not mad, but I'm not blind either." He nodded slowly, but something in his face closed up, hardened. She saw it, the part of him that had begun to see her not as mom, but as a resource, a fund, a burden. The next day, a letter arrived for Evelyn at the motel. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, neatly typed, a formal petition for conservatorship, filed under Matt Hartley and Brooke Hartley. She couldn't breathe. For several seconds, she just stared at the document. She read it again and again. It was real. They weren't waiting to inherit. They were trying to take control now. She clutched the paper in her hands, eyes burning. Not because of what they'd done, but because of how deeply she'd misread them. The love she thought was bruised was never real to begin with. That evening, she called Nancy and read the letter aloud. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Nancy said, voice shaking, "If you don't fight this, I will." "I'm not going down quietly," Evelyn whispered. "But I'm going to need help." Nancy didn't hesitate. "You've got me, and I know just the attorney." Evelyn looked at her reflection in the motel mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. But then she did. She was the woman who had raised a child alone, who had built a life from scraps, who had rocked a baby through 100 fevers and then been cast out with the recycling. She was not weak. She was not finished. She was just getting started. How do you recover when the people you love become the ones you fear? What would you do if your family tried to erase your freedom with a signature? The next morning, Evelyn walked into a law office. She didn't come for advice. She came for war. The courthouse smelled like paper and cold coffee, the kind that sat too long and lost its warmth. Evelyn sat alone at the long wooden bench outside the hearing room, a folder balanced neatly on her lap. Inside were copies of every document she had gathered in the past 2 weeks. Her bank records, letters from Tyler's teachers, a notarized letter from Nancy, even the signed summer contract she'd had Brooke and Matt agree to. Ironclad proof that she was lucid, capable, and no one's fool. Her palms were dry, her spine straight, but her heart? That was a trembling thing tucked beneath bones, fierce and fragile all at once. When her name was called, she stood without help, without hesitation, and walked into the room like a storm that had learned how to hold itself together. Matt and Brooke were already seated. Matt's tie was crooked. Brooke's lips were pressed into a thin smile, as if she'd practiced it in the mirror and wasn't sure it would hold. Their attorney, a young, overconfident man in a navy suit, stood as Evelyn entered, offering a stiff nod. Evelyn didn't nod back. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, gray streaking through her pulled-back hair. She read the petition with the practiced efficiency of someone used to seeing families break in front of her. Evelyn watched her eyes scan the page, then pause. "You're petitioning for full conservatorship of your mother," the judge said, looking at Matt. "On what grounds?" Matt cleared his throat. "We're concerned about her financial decisions, her living situation. We're just trying to look out for her best interests. And has she exhibited any cognitive decline? Any medical evidence submitted to that effect?" Matt shifted. "Not specifically, but she's been acting differently, withdrawn, secretive." Or perhaps, Evelyn said gently, rising to her feet, I've just stopped volunteering as their unpaid maid and full-time nanny. The judge glanced at her. Miss Hartley, would you like to respond? Evelyn opened her folder and approached the bench, handing over her stack of documents. These are my financial records. I've managed my own assets for decades. This is a letter from my physician confirming I'm in full cognitive health. And this, she tapped the contract page, is the agreement Matt and Brooke signed 2 months ago, asking me to return and help with Tyler. The judge skimmed the papers. Evelyn continued, Your Honor, I gave up my home to help raise my grandson. I did so out of love. I asked for nothing. But once I began asserting boundaries, basic ones like where I'd sleep or how I'd be compensated, they began treating me like a threat. Not family, not even human, just a liability with a savings account. Silence fell across the courtroom. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the scratch of the judge's pen. After a long moment, the judge looked up. This court sees no evidence that Miss Hartley is incapable of managing her own affairs. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Brooke exhaled sharply. Matt closed his eyes, but Evelyn didn't celebrate. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, walked out, and never looked back. Later that night, she sat with Nancy on the farmhouse porch. The stars above Vermont were brighter than she remembered. The air smelled like fresh hay and soil. Safe, ancient things. Do you think they'll ever say sorry? Nancy asked softly, handing her a cup of tea. I don't think they know how, Evelyn replied. She stared into the steam, feeling something inside her loosen, not forgiveness, not yet, but a kind of soft release. Like letting go of a rope she'd been holding too tightly, afraid of the fall. 3 days passed before the letter arrived. It was from Tyler. The handwriting was big, blocky, messy. Dear Grandma, I miss you. I didn't know what Mommy and Daddy were doing. I'm sorry. I want to come visit. I want to draw with you. I told my teacher you're my best person. Love, Tyler. Evelyn read it twice. Then again. Her hands trembled, but not from sadness, from hope. She didn't call Matt. She didn't respond to Brooke's silent Instagram story with the Family First caption. Instead, she mailed a box. Inside, a watercolor set, a packet of sunflower seeds, and a note. When you come, we'll plant something together. The summer passed slowly, beautifully. Evelyn began teaching a free art class at the local library for kids. Nancy helped sell their homemade jam at the Saturday market. Strangers started calling Evelyn by name, not as someone's mother, but as someone they admired. Then one afternoon, Tyler showed up, alone. Well, not entirely alone. Matt stood a few paces back, watching nervously as Tyler stepped forward with his backpack and a shy smile. Evelyn knelt. He ran into her arms without a word. They stayed that way for a long time. Later, over grilled cheese and tomato soup, Tyler pulled out his sketch pad. I drew you a new picture, he said, flipping it open. It was the two of them, side by side, holding garden tools. In the corner, a big yellow sun smiled down. This one's not for school, he said. It's just for you. She didn't cry, but something in her heart folded open, like petals touched by warmth after a long winter. That night, she tucked him into bed in the guest room, kissed his forehead, and whispered, You are not what they did. You are still good. He was already asleep. At the door, Matt stood quietly. I didn't know what Brooke was doing, he said. Not at first, and by the time I figured it out, I didn't know how to stop it. Evelyn nodded. That doesn't make it okay. I know. I'm not angry anymore, she said, but I won't forget. I don't expect you to, he replied. He looked at her the way he used to as a boy, when he'd skinned his knees and didn't want to admit it hurt. She left, he said finally. We're separating. Evelyn said nothing. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded photo. It was an old one. Her, Matt, and Tyler in the park, a picnic blanket behind them. The colors had faded, but the smiles were real. I thought maybe you'd want this, he said. She took it. Not as an olive branch, but as a seed. Because maybe in time, something new could grow. What did this story stir in your heart? Did it remind you of someone you love? If you felt something reading this, type 100 in the comments. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. You are never too old to start over, and you are never too late to matter. Thank you for watching Life Stories.